It's interesting because I think about I think about one of the sort of differences between Christianity and Judaism is that for so many Jews, being Jewish and identifying as Jewish and living a Jewish life is sometimes more about belonging and identity than it is about faith. So I think the question of faith, in a way, is a different journey than the question of identity, interestingly. I mean, it weaves together, but so as I was growing up, my parents were in the process of becoming more and more religiously observant. And when I became 8, we started keeping kosher. And then when I was 11, we moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, where we were an extreme minority. And I was one of, I think, 11 kids in my high school who were Jewish, which was a big year. Being such an extreme minority in a not just Christian, but in a culture that was so Christian dominant was difficult at the time, but it ended up being really helpful because I became very comfortable being an other, very comfortable being different than everybody else. There was no possible way I could fit in. I was tall, I had big feet, I brought matzah to school on Passover. I felt like every part of me was different. Some of that I think is just normal teenage life, but it was even more so in a culture that had such a dominant religious presence, I suppose. So when I was in high school, I was like, there was no choice but to be affiliated. For us, I think that my parents were very and are very strongly identified, and our house was really a Jewish home. The music we played was Jewish music, and like I said, we kept kosher. We would bring in kosher meat from Denver because there was no kosher meat in Salt Lake. And I really found a place to connect through a Jewish youth group, and there was regional involvement. And so I knew kids from Arizona and Nevada, and I would regularly travel there, which was a relief from high school. So I think that was a very important period of my life, from age 11 to 17, living in Salt Lake and being Jewish there. And then then I went to college in Boston, and at some point went to Israel, and actually I lived in San Francisco too. But I would say that through my connection to Israel also, through being in Israel and feeling what it's like to be Jewish there and really understanding it as a sort of almost a tribal identity, those are my people. It's much less about, in many ways, now this is not everybody, but this is me, but much more about belonging, like I said, and about sort of ethnic cultures and traditions and language, and a connectedness to people. And then I think now what's happened is that I would say that I have much more of a faith journey now. If I've dabbled in all sorts of other things and delved in the last 15 years in more Jewish texts, and I'm in a master's program now that's a Jewish program. I do see that faith particularism really can help you access the universal. When we do more to enrich people's sense of wanting to be Jewish because they connect to the great Jewish stories, great Jewish texts, great Jewish wisdom, then there's more of a pull. But if too much of our connection to Judaism is about what you can't do, or about let's be afraid because people hate us, which is legitimate, but it's not enough, then I think we're missing something. Rabbi Soloveitchik talked about 2 different kinds of covenant. There's a covenant of faith and the covenant of fate. And so if fate is a sense of, and I'm sure I'm not going to do this justice, so there's my disclaimer, but if fate is about, they've done harm to us or will do harm to us, and so that does create a sense of collective fate, and therefore a sense of collective responsibility. And that can be a positive too, right? It's not just, them and us and we got to protect ourselves, but there's a sense of collective action that comes out of that and collective responsibility. But we need to make sure we also have the other side of it, which is a covenant of faith. There has to be a reason you want to wake up in the morning and connect to the world through your history or your faith or, your neighbors.